Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus, and today we have a great show for you. Today is going to be a big NFL day because we have reached the first major deadline of the NFL season, that being NFL franchise tag deadline day. So there's been a lot of moves, a lot of franchise tags, a lot of teams deciding not to use franchise tags that have been surprising. So that's what a lot of our discussion is going to be about today. We're also going to sprinkle in a little bit of NBA as well towards the end. But we are going to start our show off with the franchise tag yesterday, deadline today. We're going to continue with Russell Wilson news. He as you might know, was released yesterday. We kind of mentioned it a little bit in our last show, but I want to do a deeper dive into what that's going to mean, not just for the future of Russell Wilson, but also for the future of the Denver Broncos, what they're going to do at the quarterback position. We're then going to transition into some movers and shakers from the NFL Combine, some of the major storylines that have been coming out of that, especially surrounding Caleb Williams. And we're going to end our show with the NBA, something that I haven't seen too many people talking about, but something that I'm surprised that not that many people are talking about, the Washington Wizards and their ridiculous losing streak. We already had one of those happen with the Pistons this season, and the Wizards are on track to catch them. Maybe. We'll have to see. But stick around, we'll talk about all of that stuff. But before we get into the show, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there for everyone to see. We'll have a little discussion about your thoughts about what we are talking about, and you will be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, and we appreciate that. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I said, let's get right into it. Today is the deadline for franchise tags to be placed on players, and we've seen just a couple franchise tags be used before then. Before today, we saw T. Higgins get tagged. That was the first major move. We saw L'Jarius Sneed get tagged yesterday on a non-exclusive tag with the Chiefs. Something right there that's interesting is that they are exploring a trade with L'Jarius Sneed, a guy who had a really, really amazing year last season, really kept that Chiefs defense together, kept them in Super Bowl contention, eventual Super Bowl champions. Without that defense and without Sneed, I don't think they are even making the Super Bowl. He was a major part of that defense last season, so it's going to be interesting to see if they are able to work something out as far as a long-term contract or a trade with him, and if it does that change what their strategy is in the draft? I think it might. I think if they have to get rid of him, they might go corner in the first round instead of a wide receiver. Obviously, those top three wide receivers are not going to be there at the end of the first at 32, so I think there's a shot that if L'Jarius Sneed is not on the team anymore, and it seems more and more like that's going to be a possibility, or that's going to be how it's going to be, that they're going to end up taking a corner at the end of the first round and maybe a wide receiver in the second or later rounds, like they did with Rashee Rice last season. But yeah, that's L'Jarius Sneed right there. Moving on to today, the franchise tags that have come out. We're going to start on the offensive side with Michael Pittman and the Colts. Another one of those guys that was most likely going to get tagged all along. The Colts were trying to get a long-term deal with him done. He is coming off his career best season, 109 receptions, over 1,000 yards. He stepped into that clear wide receiver one role last season, something that he was kind of trending towards heading into this season, but he hadn't quite reached, and last season he finally reached it, and at the right time. You get a nice quarterback prospect from the limited sample size that we saw of Anthony Richardson and pairing him with a target like Michael Pittman, a big guy that can make those contested catches, especially for a guy like Anthony Richardson, whose main concern coming out of college was that accuracy. Having a big target like Michael Pittman with great hands is going to be huge for him. So him staying in Indy is it was always trending towards him getting franchise tagged. So that's not a huge surprise. Some other big names that got franchise tagged that weren't that surprising. Antoine Winfield Jr., we talked about that a lot yesterday with the signing of Mike Evans, how it most likely meant that the Bucs were going to sign, or franchise tag, I should say, Antoine Winfield Jr., coming off that all-pro season that he had last year. Again, these guys deserve to get paid. All of these guys that got franchise tagged obviously had very good seasons. They just weren't able to make a long-term deal happen. We're going to see that a lot. It's interesting to see how players react to franchise tags because a lot of them hate franchise tags. Some of them are just like, fine, I understand, we'll work on a deal later. But it's interesting to see how all these different players react to this. So Antoine Winfield Jr. was not a huge surprise. Some bigger surprises, though, were people that didn't get franchise tagged. You go and you look at a team like the Dolphins, who decided not to use their franchise tag on Christian Wilkins, the big defensive tackle for them. He is going to be one of the top players in all of free agency, regardless of position. He is a monster on the inside. He's a leader on the defense. He's going to command a lot of money in the offseason to a team that could use a big defensive tackle like that. It's a shame. I mean, he could always come back to Miami. That's still not out of the question, but it won't be on a franchise tag. They're still working towards it. He's going to get paid this offseason, whether it be in Miami or whether it be somewhere else. As well as in New York with the Giants. There were always rumblings around Saquon Barkley, and the big story was that he wasn't going to get tagged. He did not end up getting tagged, and he said he wants to go to Houston. That's number one on the list. It seems like his days are over in the Big Blue, which that sucks. We love Saquon Barkley here in New York, but I understand. Wasn't getting along, was not getting paid for what he was doing. So there's still time. Again, nothing is set in stone with where these guys are going. They've just hit free agency at this point. But the bigger piece of this is Xavier McKinney, the safety for the New York Giants. He is one of the most underrated players in the NFL, honestly. What he does for the Giants defense that quietly was one of the best in the league down the stretch. Now, in the beginning of the year, no. And that's why the numbers don't look that great for the season overall. They were one of the worst defenses in the league at the beginning of the year. But down the stretch, I believe from like week 10-ish on, the New York Giants had one of the best defenses in the league, and Xavier McKinney was a huge part of that. Him playing that safety center field position. He is one of the most underrated players in the league, and I'm surprised that the Giants didn't franchise tag him. That's one of those guys that I was expecting to be franchise tagged, especially in a situation that like the Giants are in, where they're kind of stuck in the middle between they can't really rebuild with Daniel Jones's contract, but they're not good. So keeping around those players like that, I feel, is kind of important, and not franchising tagging him might be their biggest mistake of the offseason. I understand the argument for Saquon, but he wasn't going to be happy with the franchise tag. That was never going to work out. As far as Xavier McKinney, I feel like that might have been a bigger mistake for them. And continuing with some more franchise tag news here, Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars was franchise tagged, the defensive end. He had 17 and a half sacks last season. A guy that went in the top 10 out of Kentucky a couple seasons ago. He's finally, he was up for contract. He got that franchise tag. But what that means for the Jags is Calvin Ridley is out of there. there's a lot of places Calvin Ridley could go, and I think the one that makes the most sense is the one that we don't want. The is Kansas City. Uh, Kansas City again has proved that they don't like paying receivers, and Calvin Ridley is not going to fetch a huge paycheck. He had a kind of down season in his return after being suspended for a whole year and sitting out basically for 2 straight seasons. It wasn't like he was bad, but he wasn't great. And you could chalk that up to a lot of things. You could chalk that up to him being a little rusty. You could chalk that up to the Jaguars' offense as a whole, which kind of struggled down the stretch. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. So it's not the biggest surprise that he struggled a little bit, but people were expecting a lot out of Calvin Ridley last season. I, as well, was expecting a good amount out of Calvin Ridley last season. He is going to hit free agency, and I think he's going to end up in the Chiefs, which once again points to them not taking a receiver in the first round. If you can get Calvin Ridley on your team, you probably don't need to go out and draft a guy like Xavier Worthy that we're going to talk about later on in this episode, like Adonai Mitchell that we're going to talk about later on in this episode, like some of these guys that, they're not going to be guaranteed hits, and you don't want to waste a first round pick on that when there's other positions of need for them as well. So there is quite a lot of news with franchise tags. Like I said, franchise tag deadline was today. The Patriots used a transition tag, which is slightly different than a franchise tag. And the way that it differs is franchise tag, you're basically locking them up for a year. They can't go anywhere. They're yours. A transition tag, what it means is we're going to do a soft franchise tag, I guess, is the best way that I can describe it is the best way I can describe it to make the most sense. They're going to allow him to test the market with this tag on him, and if any team wants to match it, they can match it, and he can choose between the two offers. So that is what a transition tag is. The Patriots use their transition tag. Each team gets one of each. But yeah, the franchise tag deadline is still going on right now. Again, that line is today. The Chargers, excuse me, some other big names that did not get franchise tagged that are going to become free agents. Going back to the Chiefs with Calvin Ridley, Chris Jones. They've been working on contract extensions there, and it never seemed like they were going to use the franchise tag on him, but he is going to hit the open market again. Last year, they were able to bring him back a game after the season started, and he played obviously a huge part in that offense. He's a monster on there, so he's going to continue to be a big part in that if they use him, but there's a lot of franchise tag news, along with just some NFL news. A lot of people are getting money off of the books, so there's a lot to break down, and we will talk about that in another episode coming up. Not today. We've got a lot of stuff to get through, but thank you everyone so much for sitting through this first segment about the franchise tag on GSMC Sports and Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Excuse me, I'm all over the place. We will be right back, continuing with our NFL coverage.